Welcome to the vlog.
The Yorkshire coast, where the sea and wind strip away the land with no mercy. On the edge of the Humber estuary you will find Spurn Point. This long finger of sand is rich in wildlife and history. I'm here to do some coastal long exposure photography, and there are plenty of subjects to choose from. I'm also going to explain what my process is to create long exposure images like these.
The first thing I need to do now is find a good composition, and so it's worth investing a bit of time in finding that great shot. And you've got to be aware of the tide timings when you're at the beach like this, because you don't want to be chasing that water up and down all day long. But more important, somewhere like Spurn Point, you can end up being cut off. Yeah, so I think I've found a really nice composition here. Time to get my tripod set up. It's really important when you get your tripod in place to make sure it's nice and sturdy. The last thing you want is for any waves to come up and try and dislodge it. And you should really try and avoid moving around, particularly when you're on sand or pebbles or even mud, because even just the slightest movement can influence a bit of movement in your tripod. And that's the last thing you want when you're creating long exposure images. So my tripod is now nice and sturdy and my camera's on. Next thing I need to do is adjust the actual camera and adjust my composition. Before I do that, I need to remove this, because if the wind picks up again, that's going to be blowing all over the place, and that really isn't any good when I've got a slow shutter speed. So let's remove that now. Quite lucky I've got one of these that can just unclip, and I can just tidy that away and secure it. The other thing to remember is if you've got a center column in your tripod, try and avoid using it, because as soon as you elevate it and the higher it goes, the more unstable your camera will be on top of your tripod. The most secure place, the most stable place on a tripod is as close to the top of the legs as possible. And when you're doing long exposures, that's exactly what you should be aiming for. It's always worth using a cable release or the self-timer on the camera, because you don't want to touch it during your long exposure. So I'm going to attach my cable release now. I hardly ever use the timer, I always use one of these, but it's personal preference, there isn't a right or wrong method. Okay, so that's my cable release attached now, ready to go. Now I can tweak my camera and I can get the composition right. So let me talk you through the composition that I've got here. I've got this lovely old jetty running out into the water, leading off to the horizon. And there's some really nice clouds up above, but I'm not going to have too much sky in this shot because I want to concentrate on the old wooden posts sticking out of the water and the waves coming against them. Yeah, it's quite a nice shot, and I just love the way it leads in to the horizon, as I've just said. And the trick here is to slow that shutter speed down to under a second, and that will really give you the impression of the movement in the water as it crashes against the post. But actually what I'm looking for is to try and get the water as it's receding, as those waves recede out, and that way you get these lovely streaky lines moving down the beach. Okay, so I'm on about f11 at 200 and 100 ISO. And if I take that image now, I'm on 200s for a second. I'm not really going to get any movement in that water, so it's not really a long exposure. And what I need to do now is to add filters to the front of my camera so I can reduce that shutter speed right down to give me that lovely look that long exposure gives you. This is my filter holder, and I've already got my polariser attached, and I think it's worth using a polariser because you have got this nice blue sky and it can bring out a little bit of that blue, although I may turn this to black and white, I'm not sure yet. But also if there's any reflection on that water, the polariser is good to cut that reflection down. So I'll attach that first. Make sure that's secure, and now I'll just turn the polariser so I get the desired effects. About there's good. Okay, now the next filter I need to consider is whether or not I need a neutral density graduated filter on the front. And there is quite a bit of difference here between my exposure for the ground and for the sky. I'm going to use this filter, this graduated filter. It's a Lee 0.6 ND, and it's got a hard edge to it. And the good thing about a hard edge is when you're taking an image of a seascape like this, the horizon is pretty flat, and the hard edge can go all the way down to that horizon. So hard edges for seascapes are very good indeed. So let's put that in. And this will go in the slot furthest away from the camera on the holder. My process for applying filters, as I've already shown you, is I'll put my polarizer on first, and then I'll put my graduated ND on. Now with those fitted, I then look at the exposure that I'm getting. So I'm getting 200ths of a second at f11. That's the correct exposure. That's without a neutral density in place. But now I need to put a neutral density in place. So let's just go ahead and do that. So I'm going to put in a 6-stop filter. So this is a Lee 6-stop ND, and this goes in closer to the camera, in the slot closest to the lens. Okay, that's in place. So now I need to work out my exposure. So without the ND filter, it was 200ths of a second at f11, and I've got an app here which is from Lee. It's on my phone, and at 200ths of a second with the 6-stop, I'm getting about 1/3 of a second. So that will give me some movement, and I'll probably put in a 10-stop later on just to see what effect we get. But yeah, the apps are very good for making those calculations. Long exposure photography is such a creative process, and it yields amazing results. It's worth investing in that time just to set up your shot, get the right composition and set everything up properly and slow it right down. And remember, get your tripod in nice and dug in the sand. It's not going to move. It's good idea to have spikes on the bottom of your tripod. Don't use the center column because that will increase the instability in your camera sat on the actual tripod. Take away the camera strap, you don't need that, and if the wind blows up, that will just cause camera shake. Use a cable release or the timer inside the camera, and that helps you because you don't have to touch the camera then whilst it's actually taking that long exposure. Utilize filters, they're amazing. There's loads of different makes out there. Get a good ND filter in there and that will help you get some great long exposure effects. The most important part is just to have fun in the process and to practice and practice to make sure you get it right. There's no real right or wrong way with a lot of things in photography. It's all about experimenting and having fun.